All right, good evening. Daf Yomi for the week is sponsored by the Kahal Yereim Board of Directors in honor of Rabbi Gislison's birthday, which has already occurred. So if you haven't celebrated it at home, you should get on it quick. I think you have like a few days of miluim afterwards to be able to fill in.
And the Hebrew birthday,
right?
Actually, for those who are interested, it's Chaf Vav.
Chaf Vav Teves is Rabbi Gislison Hebrew birthday. So get ready. Time to start shopping now. Get on the special Rabbi Gislison clearance sales that are upcoming. Bis 120 Jahr and the flyer, right? The flyers. This is crisp, fresh. It's wonderful. The design is beautiful. It's amazing. Who's that guy? And then we have we have Rosh Chodesh wings and beer, Malacha Malkas. We've got summer barbecues, all kinds of, and we're a warm and welcoming chevra, especially when we learn indoors. It's a geschmack learning environment, and if you can make it down,
Menachos, right?
Right, Menachos is coming Tuesday, January 13th. We hope.
So for those who have like a New Year's resolution to learn more Torah,
that's correct. If you're new, that's a good point. New Year's resolution's coming, right? You got 2 weeks to get yourself in order almost. So.
Perfect.
I think it's wonderful. Yeah. So if you want more information, you can contact Jeff Wald, right? His phone number's on the flyer, so you can zoom in on the picture. Let's get going with the Gemara. Okay. Gemara said, the Mishnah had said that we were talking about these bulls and goats that were, the service was done inside of the Azara, was done inside of the, inside of the Heichal. So then if they were done kosher, then we have to remove the animal outside of the three camps in order to burn it, and the Torah tells us that the person who's performing the burning of the services becomes tamei, his garments become tamei. However, if something ruins the sacrifice, there's a psul, then we burn it right there on the bira. Right, that's what it says in the Mishnah. Right, it calls it that we do the burning on the bira, the base habira. That's where we're going to do it. And the first Gemara is quiet. The Gemara is, and then there's no tuma because not a kosher korban and only the kosher korban creates the tuma. So the Gemara wants to know my bira. What is this bira that you're doing this burning? Amar Rabbi Barachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Barachana saying Rabbi Yochanan, Makom yesh bahar habayis. There was a place on Har Habayis, on the Temple Mount area. Ubira Shmo. Its name was Bira. Right? Reish Lakish, Amar Reish Lakish says no. Kol habayis kulo koroi bira. The entire whole area of the Beis Hamikdash area was called Bira. Shinamar, the pasuk in Divrei Yomim says, "Habira asher hachinosi," the area of this Bira that I have prepared. Now, the word Bira, right? We're familiar with it as Shushan Habira in the Megillah, right? It's the capital city, so it is a high up or elevated capital type of place, and that's the literal translation. But this is either a special place where they were burning, or the entire area is called the Bira. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba Bar Avua, Shosha Beis Hadeshanin Hain. There are actually three places where they had ashes and a fire that would burn the korbanos. Place number one, Beis Hadeshan Godol Hayab Azara. There was a location where they had ashes that they would burn in the temple courtyard itself. Shasham Sorfin Psule Kodshe Kodshin. That's where they would burn anything that became puzzle. So if something becomes puzzle, any korbanos become puzzle, and we said we have to burn those korbanos once they become puzzle. They had a fire not on the Mizbeach, but on the grounds of the Azara in the courtyard. The Emure Kodshim Kalim. Also, if you had the innards in the inside organs of Kodshe Kodshim, are Kodshe Kalim, so those had to be burned inside of the Azara. So that was burned. If they become puzzle, they have to be burned inside the Azara. And also Param and Israfim Mesir and Israfim Sheira Behen Psul Kodim Zrika. If these bulls or goats that were supposed to be burned out, so if the psul comes, if they become invalid before the sprinkling of the blood, so that they're is still there in the Azara, they get burnt right there in the Azara. Second one. Beis Hadeshin Acher Haisa Har Habayis. There was a second area where they were burning things that took place. That was a fire that was on the Har Habayis area. The Har Habayis is the entire mount, the entire temple area mount. I always remember, I got to bring the book back. The entire temple area mount, not the Beis Hamikdash itself, Let's see if he has any pictures in the beginning. No, he doesn't have any more pictures. We've already gone through all our pictures. He has so if you look where the Beis HaMikdash area was, then you spread out the entire courtyard temple area mount. They had a fire in that section outside of the courtyards areas. What was burned there? Shesham sorfim param hanisrafim asirim nisrafim she'ir ben psul achar zrikan. If after the blood had already been sprinkled, then these bulls or goats that had to be burned outside of the camp, if they become puzzle at that point, then you don't have to take them all the way to the outside of the camp, but they do leave the azara, and therefore they become burnt on the Temple Mount area. And the third one, ukemitzvasan, if they are done properly, if these animals are to be burned properly, was chutz l'shalosh machanos. It was in an area that was outside of all three camps. So outside of Yerushalayim altogether, they had this place. They would carry the animals outside of Yerushalayim and burn them there. Okay. Tani, Levi learned the following in Brisa, Shlosha Beis HaDeshanin. There were three places, as we just described, where they were burning these korbanos. One, Aleph, the first one is Beis HaDeshin Godol Haya Bazar. There was a big area they were burning in the Azara, in the temple courtyard. Shesham Sorfim Psuli Kachim Kachim, as we just said, this is where they burned the puzzle korbanos, Imuri Kachim Kalim, and the limbs of the Kachim Kalim. That all of those that were puzzle. Viparim and Israfim, Musir and Israfim, She'ira ben Psul Kodem Zrika, Bain la'achar zrika. According to this version, according to Levi, he disagrees now. He says that this is also where you burned these bulls and goats if they became puzzle, whether before or after you sprinkled the blood. Remember that before, Rav Nachman had said that it was only if they became puzzle before they sprinkled the blood. After they sprinkled the blood, they would take it out to the Beis Habira, the area that was in the Temple Mount area. This opinion says no. Even still, we're going to burn it inside the Azara. Well, Beis Hadeshin Acher, the second area where there was a Beis Hadeshin, an area for burning in ashes, was Haya Bahar Habayis. It was on the Temple Mount. What would they burn there? Shesham Sorfim Parman Sorfim Simran Sorfim She'ir ben Psul Bi'etziason. They would get burnt. That's where you would burn. Once you started to take the animals, you had to take these animals out of the Beis HaMikdash. Once they left the Azara, and then they became puzzle, let's say became tummy at some point on the way out, then they were burned right there on the Har HaBayis. They didn't have to get all the way out of Yerushalayim, but you wouldn't for sure bring them back in, they're psul. So they would be burned on Har HaBayis, and the third one is Kemitzvasan. If they were being burned properly, Chutz L'Shalosh Machanos, then it would be outside of all three camps. So, Boi Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah asks us a fun question. Ma'u shetoil bepar manisrafim u besrafim hanisrafim. What would happen? Lina, right? Lina is when we leave the offering over till the next day, right? It was not offered on time. What happens to these animals, these bulls and these goats that are supposed to be burned outside of all three camps? So, do they become like kachim psulim? Do they become like other offerings that are now puzzle, and you're supposed to burn them in the Azara, right, inside the courtyard? Or do they get burned on the Har HaBayis, not outside of all three camps, and they do not transmit too much to the garments because they're not kosher at that point? So here's how the argument works. Mi amrina, do we say, ki mahanya lina babasar de barachila? What is lina? Lina is when you have edible korbanos, and you're supposed to eat them for a certain amount of time, and you don't. And then you get to the next day, now it's too late, so now they have to be burned. So honey, aval honey delav ne'achilin hulo. There's no lina that applies to this meat though, because this meat doesn't get eaten. This whole animal is supposed to be burned. So therefore, it is. They are supposed to be. So therefore, odilma loshnor. We say no. It makes no difference, and they are puzzle belina if they get left overnight. Either way. So Amar Rava. So Rava says, Ha milsa iboy leila Abaye. Abaye had asked this question, upshatna lemeha, and he came to the conclusion from this brisa. And he says like this, we learned this above. The Shavin, Rabbi Shimon and the Chachamim, have a disagreement. If you have a thoughts of pigul on these internal korbanos, right? If you're thinking that these korbanos are going to be done outside their proper place or proper time, so the Chachamim say that there's still pigul on these inner offerings, and Rabbi Shimon says there's no pigul on these inner offerings. The Shavin, they agree that if you considered about the eating these bulls and they're burning, shelo asa klum. They agree, right? You decided that you're going to eat these animals outside of their proper time. You're going to eat them tomorrow, or you're going to burn their meat tomorrow. Then that's meaningless. Why? Because my lav midemachshava lo pasla. If thinking about doing it tomorrow doesn't invalidate them, so lina nami lo pasla. Why would it be that the thought of doing these offerings tomorrow wouldn't invalidate it? It's because even if you left it over, that also wouldn't be a psul that would cause it to be burnt in any event. So therefore, he's trying to prove that since they agree that if you're thinking about leaving it overnight, that doesn't invalidate your offering, actually leaving it overnight doesn't create the psul that requires it to be burnt. The Dilma, so the answer is no. Dilma machshavahu delo pasla valina pasla. Maybe that's not true. Maybe it's only pigul that isn't effective, but being left overnight is still gonna ruin it, right? So it's not really a proof. It was just sort of a thought that it makes good sense that those two things go hand in hand, but they might not, because pigul is a different prohibition from lina, and they don't necessarily correlate. They don't have to. So Toshma, come and listen. If you have bulls that are supposed to be burnt and the goats that are supposed to be burnt, you can, if you use the carcass of these animals, you commit me'ilah, right? They're illegal to use because shehukdishu, because from right after they became hektish, nishchatu hushchatu lipasel. If from the time that there was shchita on them, so then huchshru li pasel b'tvul yom. Now they become able to be ruined if somebody who's a tvul yom touches them, mechusar kipurim, or somebody who is not able to consume. Right, he's somebody who still has these this korbanos to bring the next day. The guy who's a zav or the person who's mitzora, if he touches them, they're also invalid. Right, because you can't invalidate an animal while it's still alive by touching it in these ways, but you can invalidate it by you can commit me'ilah on a live animal, right? But you can't invalidate them while they're alive. But once you do shchita, then they can be ruined. Ubelina. And also here it says clearly that you can also ruin the animal by leaving it over. If you leave it till tomorrow. My lav linas basar, aren't we saying that even the meat of the animal, if you leave it over to the next day, no, that's not true. We're talking about linas emurin, that we're talking about leaving over the burned parts that are burned for all korbanos. That for sure, everyone agrees that that's psul, right? If you leave we're just not sure about the meat, right? That the consumption of that is going to be lina because that has to be burnt anyway. So we're not sure whether that's lina. So that doesn't prove anything. Now, since the end of this brisa says, kulan mo'alin bahen bebeis hadeshen, that all of these, even while they are being burned, you can commit me'ilah, all these bulls and these goats. Ad sheyutach habasar. At what point do they no longer can you commit me'ilah on them? Once they're burnt up, right? Once they're already singed, then they're no longer. Like now the mitzvah's already done. They've been burned. Now they've been burned. You touch the ashes or something like that. You don't commit me'ilah by using that, right? It's only when the offering is still meat, then you commit me'ilah. Now, midaseifa basar, if the end is telling us that we're talking about me'ilah by the meat, meaning that if you use the meat, you use the meat for whatever purpose, then you're going to commit me'ilah. That means reisha nami babasar. The beginning, which was talking about lina, is also talking about the meat, and that resolves our question. If you leave the meat over till the morning, is it prohibited because of lina? Midi area, what are you talking about? Why does one thing have to connect to the other? Seifa basar, the end could be talking about the meat, that you can commit me'ilah until the meat is actually burnt. And reisha imurin, and the reisha, which is the beginning part, is talking about leaving it overnight. That's a prohibition by the burnt parts. And that's the psul of lina only applies to the burnt parts. So there's no real proof there either. It's a little bit dicey way to explain a brisa, where they're both parts of the brisa are talking about their own separate things, but it can work. So we leave it there. It doesn't prove anything. Toshma, come and listen. Titani Levi teaches as follows. She'ira ben psul b'yitzia son. So we said that Levi in the brisa that we had recently quoted, and that's why we wound up going down this rabbit hole about whether the meat of these korbanos is committed lina or not, is that this brisa that we quoted from Levi, that if the offering becomes invalidated after it leaves the azara, right? So then you're going to burn it on the Beis Habira, you're going to burn it on the Harabayas area. Not inside the azara, because it already left the azara. So now, how are you invalidating this animal? How is this animal becoming invalid? My love, lina isn't the psul that you take it outside of the azara, and then if you leave it without using it until the next day, then it can be pasul belina. So lo, lifsol tuma. We don't necessarily need that to be the only way. You can also ruin it by having something tame touching it. As we said, that was the example that I gave, was that it's tame. If it becomes tame once it already leaves, that's an example of how it can be pasul. So also upsul yitzia. Also, it could also become pasul if you take it out of the azara before you sprinkle the blood. Things have to go in order. Remember that the meat, before the things that are supposed to be burned, things that you're not allowed to take any korbanos out of the azara before you sprinkle the blood. Let's say, for example, kodshe kalim. You have a shlamim offering, and a person's allowed to eat his korban shlamim anywhere in Yerushalayim. Well, that's fine. He can take that meat outside of the azara, but he has to wait until the blood is thrown for his korban. Then the meat becomes his. Now he can take it out. But if he took the meat out beforehand, before he sprinkled the blood, then it's going to invalidate it. Okay.
What's the difference between lina and nosar? They sound.
I think it's the same. Nosar is the same thing. Yes, the psul is lina. Nosar is the leftover meat. Right? Lina is the invalidation. Right? Leaving it overnight, lina becomes nosar. So if you leave it overnight, then it becomes leftover nosar.
Gotcha.
I think that's what I think, because that's a good point.
Okay.
Right? Boy Rabbi Elazar asks the following question. Yitzia ma'u shetohil bepara nisrafim usir nisrafim. So if you take the meat of these animals outside of the azara, when you're talking about these bulls that are going to be burnt, does that invalidate these offerings as well? They become kachim psulim as well. So, Maika bi boile. What exactly is the question that he's asking? So, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba says, Aliba demand Amar adayin lo higia zmano latzeis. We're talking about, according to the opinion of Reish Lakish, we had an argument earlier on between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish on Daf Peitas. It was about almost a month ago, so it's a long time ago. But this argument was that if you take kodshe kalim, we talk about this shlomim that somebody brings. Okay, so let's say you take it outside of the azara before zrika. Okay, so if you took it outside of the azara after zrika, it would for sure be okay. The question is, if you take it out before zrika, does that ruin the korban or not? So this question that we're asking is the same thing by this, it applies in here as well. According to Reish Lakish, who says that by the meat of kodshe kalim, the shlamim, right? He says that if you take the meat of a shlamim out before you sprinkle the blood, it ruins it because it's not time for you to take it out yet. Same thing here. You can't take this animal out to be burned until you've sprinkled the blood yet. So you haven't done that yet. You take it out too early. It's a psul. It ruins it. Okay. Now, mi amrina. But the question is according to Rabbi Yochanan. Mi amrina and hani mili basar de'in sofal atzeis chova. He says, are we talking about the meat of kodshe kalim? We're talking about the shlamim meat, right? Which is not going to be required to leave. At some point, it can leave the azara, but it's not required to leave, like this meat of this bull and this goat that has to get burnt. Avahani desofim, let's say chova. Here, it's a little bit stronger. These actually must leave the azara at some point. They have to get out all the way out in order to be burnt. Low, that we would say that it is not invalidated when it leaves because it sort of has a stronger connection to the outside. Or it doesn't make a difference that it's going to be obligated to leave. Right now, it's not time for it to leave yet. You haven't thrown the blood. So you're too early. If you take it out too early, you've ruined it. So what is it? So Tashma, come and listen. Detani Levi. Again, we're going to quote this brisa from Levi. She'ira bo psul b'yitziaso. Let's say there was a psul when this korban leaves the azara. Okay, so we've got this animal. It comes as soon as he was giving examples of how is it that this korban that's supposed to be burned outside, when it leaves the azara, how is it going to become pasul? We said, okay, well maybe we suggested that it was a circumstance of lina. That was what we had suggested before. We said, no, it's not lina. It could be tuma. And then we suggested also it could be that they took it out before they threw the blood. So my love, the psul yitzia. So here you see that if you take the meat, if you take the carcass out before you throw the blood, it's pasul. So the answer is no, not necessarily. It's psul tuma, psulina. It could be the psul of tuma, or it could be according to the opinion that we said before. We never really resolved. If there's a psul, it could become pasul by lina by staying overnight till tomorrow. Then it could also become pasul. So that was our second doubt. So we're not really sure about lina. We're not really sure if it also becomes invalidated by going out of the azar before you sprinkle the blood. Third question that we have. Boy, Rabbi Elazar asks again, on these animals that are supposed to be burnt outside of the three camps, and the goats are supposed to be burnt outside the three camps. Sheyatza rubo, b'miut aver. Let's say if most of the animal leaves the courtyard area, but the majority includes a small minority of one of the limbs. So imagine a cow, right? Or a bull, right? So you've got the majority, you start taking at the majority of the animal, and you've gotten to 51% of the animal is outside. So the animal is now outside. The only thing is that 5% of the animal that's in this 51% is one of its legs. The other 45% of that leg is inside. So now, Mahu, what's the halacha? Hach miyuta de'ever basa ruba shadinan lei, v'halo nafkale. Do you say, well, 45% of that limb is still inside. Therefore, the extra 5% of that limb is considered to also be inside. And now, because of that, you don't have 50% of the animal outside anymore. Because you need that extra little bit of that limb in order to make up the 51%. And so therefore, this bull is not really outside of the azara yet. Or do we not care about the limb? Look at the animal. You've got 51% of the animal out there. So therefore, it's 51% of the animal. It's outside, right? So which is it? And the reason, what's the practical difference? We said as soon as the animal leaves the azara, the people who are carrying it become tameh. So that's what's important for us to know. So the Gemara says, Pshita de lo shavkinan ruba de behema vazlina basa ruba de varim. It's obvious, right? It doesn't make sense to disregard the majority of the animal and to go by the majority of the limb, right? So that can't make sense. That question couldn't have been his question. What makes, you've got 51% of the animal outside, and you're going to tell me it's still inside because one of the limbs is still inside, so therefore you have to take part of the limb which is already outside back. That doesn't make sense. Ella, rather, the question was like this. Shiyotze chetzio berov aver. You have half of the animal outside, 50% exactly. And one of the limbs is mostly outside. You have one limb, one of the legs is 60% outside. That's making up part of your 50% of the animal. So, hai miyuta de aver, basa rov aver shadina leva hanafakle. Do we say, okay, well, now that it's 50-50, we're going to take a look at this limb. And we're going to say that since most of the limb is outside, the rest of the limb must be considered outside as well. Now you've got more than 50% of the animal outside, and the people are tameh. O dilma, or no, basar behema shadina le, we have to take a look at the animal itself. And the animal is only 50-50. And so therefore, if it's 50-50, it doesn't cause the tumah. It's only tummy when the animal leaves and it hasn't left. So teku. So we don't have an answer to that question. Okay, so those are our questions that we asked that we didn't really have good answers for. Rabbi bar Rav Huna, masni la begavri. Rabbi Rav Huna said, no, you know what the last question about the majority and the minority was? It wasn't about the animal itself. The question that they had was about the people. What do you mean? Imagine there are 5 people carrying this animal. V'nafgu tlasa upashalahu trey. 3 of them have already left the azara. They're pulling it out, and 2 are still inside. What's the halacha there? Basar rov misaskin azlinan. Do we say most of the people are outside, so therefore we consider the whole animal outside, and therefore the other 2 are tummy as well? Oh, basar behema azlinan. Or it doesn't matter about the people. Let's take a look. How much of the animal is outside? So
we were discussing just before.
Correct. Now we have to. So it doesn't matter that 3 of the people are outside. It doesn't matter if 3 people are pulling 5% of the animal, they're all hanging on to the one part, then it's not outside yet. So, boy, Rabbi Elazar asks the following question. Here's a fourth question that we have now. New question. Parim usirim hanisrafim sheyotzu v'chazru. Okay, you've got bulls and the goats that are supposed to be burned, and they went out of the Azara, and then they brought them back into the Azara. Okay, they were out, now they're back. So, Mahu, what's the halacha there? Mi'amrinan kaven denafki luhu itamu luhu. Do we say, well, the first people who took the animal out, they took the animal out. That made them tummy. So these people are tummy. That's it. You can't become untummy. Oldima kaven to hadr hadr. Or do we say, look, it went back. So therefore, it's like it never left. And therefore, retrospectively, these people are not, the first people who took it out are not tummy. Because they never did anything. The animal's back. So Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Mamel. Rabbi Abba Bar Mamel says, Toshma, come and listen on that one. Hayu sovlin osan b'motos. Let's say, our Mishnah says, they were carrying this animal on poles. Okay. Harishonim yatsu chutz l'chumas hazara. The first group left the walls of the courtyard. V'achronim lo yatsu, but the second ones have not. Harishonim sheyatsu chutz l'chumas hazara mitamim begadim. The first ones that went outside are tamei, and their garments are tamei. V'achronim, the last ones, ein mitam begadim ad shigetsu. They're not tamei until they leave. Now, v'saka daitach keven denafki luhu itamu hanach deika gavai litamei. So he says, well, what's going on here? If we're talking about, if the ones that are, once the animal left, so they should become tamei, so then the ones that are still in the Azara should become tamei. Because the fact that the bull left, the bull left, is not dependent on the people, we said. It's dependent on the animal. So therefore, if the people that are inside the Azara are not tamei, despite the fact that the animal left. How does that work? The animals, the front people have already gone out. The cow is the bull is most of the way out. And now you're telling me that the back people who haven't left yet are not out. So therefore, what we're saying is, they are, once the basic bottom line is, the people who are still inside the Azara, inside the courtyard, are protected from tumah. Somehow being in the Azara removes your tumah. So therefore, we're going to presume that that also means that if these people brought the animal outside and then brought it back inside, once they go back into the Azara, they're not tamei anymore. Amar Ravina says, V'tispra, does that make any sense? Doesn't make any sense. He says, one second, in order for you to fulfill what the pasuk says, that, one second. We're trying to prove from the fact that these people who are the back people who have never left the Azara, that they are tahor. So now we're gonna try to prove that from that if it's inside, that now that this goes outside of the Azara, comes back in, that they are not tamei. So one second, we need to be able, the pasuk says that in order to become tamei from the bull, they have to fulfill what the pasuk says, that v'achrechin yavo ramachne, after the bull leaves the Azara, after it leaves the courtyard, it goes to the outside, goes outside of the camp. So maybe the reason why the people who are outside, who are still tahor, is not because they're like people who go back in. It's not that they left and they come back in and the courtyard is keeping them pure. It's that because they can't, if they've never left, they can't become impure, right? In other words, the way that we were presuming it is that there's some kind of characteristic of the courtyard itself that if you're inside the courtyard, it now removes your tumah. That's not what we're saying. It's that because you never left the courtyard and went into the camp, that's why you're not tamei. So if you had left and come back, you would be tamei. Ella Rabbi Elazar, hechi boila. So the question is, how's he asking this question, right? If they go out and they come back in, for sure that the animal is not tahor, they're not tahor. Once they go out, they're tamei. So how is it supposed to be that they go back in, they become tahor? So the answer is, Kegon de Nikiti la bebakulse. What we're talking about is the situation is, the bull is inside the Azara, and the people who are carrying this bull out, they are outside, and they reach back into the Azara with poles. So now, if they, second, this is a difficult case for me. Hang on a second. The case is, the people who are carrying it are outside, and they're holding sticks, and the bull is inside. So now, they can become tameh, right? Because they're outside, right? If they're inside, they never left, then they can't become tameh, right? But the issue is, can the bull make them tameh? Because this bull is a bull that went out and came back in. So if we say that once the bull left the Azar in the first place, now if it goes back in, it cannot make a new set of people tameh by taking it out again, because it already did that part. It already left. Put it back in. Now the question that he's asking is, can the next set of people make it become tameh again? Because any bull that has not left the Azara, it still can, once it leaves the Azara, makes the next set tameh. Or do we say, since it already left the Azara one time, it made the people who took it out the first time tameh, now it can't make the next set of people tameh. Doesn't work that way. So that was his question. That's what he wanted to ask. It's sort of a weird sort of a case. Okay, so now none of those questions are answered. All of those questions are left. Tana Rabbanan rabbis learned the following. Parim upara, whether we're talking about the parim, what are the bulls? The bulls are the ones that are, the blood was offered inside the heichal that we've been talking about, that's going to be burned outside the camp. The para, the cow, that's the para duma. And se'ir hamishtaleach, and the goat that is sent outside of the camps on Yom Kippur, that's the Azazel goat that gets thrown off the cliff. Mishaleach, hasorfan, v'hamotzion, mitame bigadim. All of those cases, the person who sends out the goats, the person who burns these offerings, who burns them, and the one who takes them out of the Azara, all of those people become tameh, and their garments become tameh as well. Vehein atzman ein mitamim begadim. But those people themselves, they can't transmit tuma to more clothes. Meaning, if they touch clothes after that, only the clothes that they're wearing at that moment that become tameh. If they touch further more clothes, they don't transmit tuma to those clothes. Ein mitamim aval mitamim ochlin umashkin. However, they do have sufficient tuma that if they touch food or drink, they can transmit tuma to the food or drink. Diver Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Meir says. The Chacham say, para uparim mitamim ochlin umashkin, that the para aduma and the bulls that are being burned outside, they can transmit tuma to food and to drink if something touches the bodies of those animals. Sa'ir hamishtaleach, but the goat that's being sent away, eino mitame. That one cannot. Shehu chai. Why? Because it's still alive. Tuma cannot transmit from a live animal, which we learned in that in the past. So therefore, this live goat that's being chased off the cliff, if it touches food or drink, it can't transmit tuma. Can't transmit tuma from a live animal. Okay, so now, let's discuss this. The rationale behind the two different approaches. Bishlam, Rabbi Meir, fine, I understand Rabbi Meir. Kedetana debe Rabbi Shmuel. It's like we learned in a brisa from the Yeshiva Rishmel, the Tana Rabbi Shmuel, learned in the Yeshiva Rishmel. I'll call Zera Zerua, talking about the rules of Tuma and Tahara, right? On any seed, right, edible seed, that one of the liquids, there's 7 liquids that if it falls upon something, then it becomes, we call hukshir l'tuma, able to transmit tuma. Can't transmit tuma onto a dry item, but you can transmit if you have a liquid. And those liquids are yad, shchat, dam. Yad is yayin, is wine. Dalet is dam. Shin is shemen, is oil. The ches is chalav, is milk. The tes is tal, is dew. And then dalid again is did I say dam, blood? Dvash is honey. And then mem is mayim, is water. So if you get any of those liquids onto one of these, onto something, and then it touches something tameh, it transmits the tuma. So now, this rule is not just about seeds. This rule is about any food. So now the pasuk, why does the pasuk talk about seeds as opposed to any other food? Mazraim shein sofan li tameh tuma chamura. Because just like seeds, right, they can only become so tameh. Right? You can't get a seed to become an avatuma, like a person can become an avatuma, right? You can't have that way. Utsrichen hechsher. They need to have some kind of liquid upon them in order to transmit tuma. Av kol she'ein sofan litame tuma chamura tzrichen hechsher. So too, anything which doesn't rise to the level of being an avatuma can only transmit tuma if it has a liquid on it. Right? So if a person is only a rishon tuma or something like that, it needs to be wet in order to transmit tuma. But yatzasa nevelas of tahor. But if you've got something like, for example, the bird, a kosher bird that dies without shchita, shesofli tame tuma chamura. If somebody swallows that meat, that nevela meat from a kosher bird, so we said that it creates tuma on a person and his garments. That's why it becomes a avatuma, so therefore that ain't tzricha hechsher. It doesn't need liquid because it's going to transmit tuma on a significant level. So therefore, not only does it transmit tuma itself in that, since it can transmit tuma on that high level, if it touches food as well, it can transmit tuma regardless of the fact that it doesn't have a liquid. So because of that, that's what Rabbi Meir is saying. These items, since they can transmit tuma in a circumstance where the person is carrying it outside of the azara, even if it touches something else, it can transmit tuma to that other thing. That makes sense. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. El Rabbanon, but now the question is on the Rabbanon. Right? They say that the goat can't transmit tuma. Is lehu de Tana Rabbi Yishmael. If they agree with what the Tana of Rabbi Yishmael is saying, that since it has a higher level of tuma, can transmit tuma on a higher level, because it's going to make a person who is carrying these objects tummy and their garments tummy as well. So then afilu sir mishtaleach. Then even the goat, since it's going to transmit that high level of tuma, it should also be able to transmit tuma without a hechsher, without a liquid, because I understand that generally speaking, a live animal cannot, but this is different. This is a live animal that transmits tuma on a high level. The leislein, if they don't hold, they disagree with the Tana Beirishmal. Afilo paro parim min alan. So then, why would the bull or the paraduma? Why would it transmit tuma without a liquid? So Kialsa Ravdimi explained Amri B'Marav. They said in Eretz Yisrael, Tzrichen hechsher tuma mimakom acher, that they're suggesting that they need a liquid. In other words, they're not saying that you can transmit tuma from these bulls or cows for the cow over to a food without a liquid. No, they're just telling you that they require a liquid. They can transmit tuma because even though their tuma gets transmitted by carrying it out, they also have inherent tuma such that they can transmit tuma, but only if there's a liquid, because they don't agree with the idea that without a liquid they can transmit tuma. Therefore, that's why they say by the goat, by the live animal, it does not transmit tuma. Okay, so now the question is, at what point are they able to transmit this tuma? So, boy, Rabbi Elazar asks the following question: Paramus ir minisrafim, the bulls and the goats that are burnt, mahu sheyitamu ochen umashkin bifnim kibachutz. While they're still in the azara, they haven't been able to transmit tuma because they only transmit tuma to the people who carry it out of the azara. So they haven't transmitted tuma at all yet. If I get this carcass wet inside the azara, can it transmit tuma? So, do we say, mechusar yitzia ke mechusar maisadami? There is an action missing here. It hasn't been brought out, so therefore the tuma hasn't been activated yet. Therefore, even if you get it wet, it can't transmit tuma to food. So, olo, or no, it's going to be able to transmit tuma at some future point, this very animal. So therefore, it can even transmit tuma in the azar once you get it wet. Balser de boy hadar pashta. After he asked the question, he realized, I know the answer to that. If it hasn't gone out, it's missing in action. That means that this animal is not able to transmit tuma yet. So therefore, the fact that it's able to get wet, once it gets wet, it's not going to transmit tuma to food or beverages because it's not in the state that it needs to be in order to transmit tuma. So Rabbi Abba Bar Shmuel asks Rabbi Chia Bar Abba, Nivlas of Tahar Rabbi Meir Mahu Shiyatame Kazayas. Okay, according to Rabbi Meir says, since it's able to transmit tuma, it can transmit tuma with touch. Okay, the size of the transmission of tuma that you need, generally speaking, for food to transmit tuma is an egg's volume. However, normally when we have a prohibition of eating something, the rule is it's a kazayas. This nevela, this non-shechted bird, this kosher bird that was not shechted, right? You've got your non-kosher chicken, and you're going to swallow it. Since you're swallowing it, it creates tuma when you eat a kazayas of it. So that means now if I've got this amount of a kazayas, which is able to cause tuma, now can it transmit tuma to food? Because it's not enough. There's not a size enough to transmit to food. But on the other hand, Rabbi Meir says, once it can transmit tuma on a high level, it transmits tuma. So what's the halacha there? We have two sort of conflicting principles. So, if the meat was on the ground, right? If you've got non-kosher chicken and it's sitting here on the table, so then there's no question. Because why? We just said mechusar ma'aseh. If it doesn't have an action, it's not ready for it to transmit tuma, so then it can't transmit tuma. The food is not being eaten here. It's just sitting on the table, this non-kosher chicken. If it's in his mouth, the guy is chewing it and it comes in contact with other food in his mouth, of course that transmits tuma. So lo tiboyach, there's no question. Of course that transmits tuma because it's about to be used. Ki tiboyach, the question is denakat le biyadeh. He's got it in his hand. He's holding it like this. So is that mechusar kreva ka mechusar ma'aseh dami? The fact that you haven't put it in your mouth, is that missing a step? And therefore this kazayas can't transmit tuma? Olo or no? It's not missing a step. You're about to put it in after all, when you make a bracha, you have the food in your hand. That's immediate right before you're going to do it. So Reb Chia answers the question. He says, "Mechusar kreva lav ki mechusar ma'aseh dami." No, holding it in your hand is not like you're missing in action, right? That's why we can make a bracha holding the food in our hand, because not missing in action, it's like it's ready to be eaten and ready to be consumed. Therefore, if he's holding his hand, it comes in contact with another food, it transmits tuma. Esfei, let's ask the following question. More tuma and tara stuff. There are 13 things that we said about non-kosher chicken. Right? And this is one of them. Zevachim, here's one of them. Tzricha machshava, in order for it to be able to be a food, to transmit tuma in the size of a kazayas, it needs to be thought of to be food. So it cannot combine, because if it's not in a status of being ready to be used as food, then it's not food, and it cannot be combined together with other food in order to transmit tuma as a kibetza. Ve'ein tzricha hechsher, and it does not need a liquid in order for it to transmit tuma. Utama tumas ochlin bekabetza, and it also transmits tuma to food if you have a betza amount of it. So now, what's going on here? My love, Rabbi Meir, aren't we suggesting this is Rabbi Meir's point of view? Because after all, it says it doesn't need any liquid in order to transmit the tuma. Nevertheless, it says you need an egg's volume. So therefore, that maybe Rabbi Meir's opinion is that you need an egg's volume. So one second, no, that's not true. It's Rabbanan. This is the rabbi's perspective. That's why you need a kibetza, because it can't transmit tuma. Now, 1 second. V'ha'ktani reisha, the beginning said tzricha machshava vein tzricha hechsher. If it's the Rabbanan's point of view, then we said it doesn't need a liquid. The Rabbanan said it needs a liquid. So how come it can transmit tuma without a liquid? Uman shmas lo haisvar. Who's the one who says it can transmit tuma without a liquid? That's Rabbi Meir. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. Ubi the reisha Rabbi Meir, seifanami Rabbi Meir. If the first part is Rabbi Meir, then the last part should be Rabbi Meir. We know where we're headed already, right? Midi area, who says hakadisa. One could be Rabbi Meir's opinion. One could be the Rabbanan's opinion. So the Gemara asks, you can ask according to the continuation of that Mishnah, and it says like this: Shchita sa umalika sa. If you do shchita or malika on a kosher bird, chicken, mitaheres treifa sa, it's going to make the treif animal tahor, meaning it might not be kosher, it's not going to permit it to be eaten, but at the very least you've removed it from being a nevela, which transmits tuma if you eat it. So you've done the shchita, you haven't made it kosher to eat, but you've at least removed the tuma. Okay? Uman shmas le hasvara. Who's the one who holds that? Right? So that is Rabbi Meir. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. The other opinions disagree. They say if the shchita isn't effective to make it kosher to eat, then the shchita is not effective at all. It's still nevela. So now, Reisha v'Sefer Rabbi Meir u'Metzia Rabbanan. You've got a very difficult Mishnah to learn now. You've got the beginning is Rabbi Meir's opinion, the end is Rabbi Meir's opinion, and you're insisting that the middle is the Rabbanan's opinion. The answer is yes. We're going to say that Reisha v'Sefer Rabbi Meir u'Metzia Rabbanan. The beginning and end is Rabbi Meir. The end is the Rabbanan. Okay, so now let's continue to discuss this tuma that Rabbi Meir says by the nevela's oath. Amar le Rav Hamnuna le Rabbi Zera. Rav Hamnuna said to Rabbi Zera, Lo tesiv akarech adam rit la li hamilsa. Don't sit down. Before you sit down and get yourself settled, you got to answer me this. Nevela's oath tahar le Rabbi Meir. This bird, that is nevela, non-kosher bird, non-kosher chicken, according to Rabbi Meir, right? So, monin la rishon v'sheni, o ein monin rishon v'sheni. What kind of tuma does it transmit, right? Do we say, right, the person who touches it becomes right, we have the way that tuma works. It goes that you have your high level, your avatuma. Something touches an avatuma becomes a rishon latuma, and then it can become a sheni. The food can even become a sheni latuma. So the question is, does this chicken that's non-kosher chicken, is it an avatuma? Does it transmit tuma like an avatuma basically? Because if this person swallows it, it's an avatuma. So now is it transmitted when it touches the food? Is it an avatuma? Therefore, it's transmitting rishon tuma to that food that it touches, and then that food can further make something else into a sheni, or no? Or is it basically the thing that touches it it's already like a rishon? It's like one step removed because it's not being tummy when you swallow. It's only tummy through touch. So maybe this chicken is already like a rishon latuma, and it's only really creating a sheni latuma, and it can't transmit that tuma further. So Amar Le, so he says, Kol heicha demitame odam b'maga monin bo rishon v'sheni. Whenever you have a circumstance that a person can become tame by touching that item, then you know you've got a rishon and a sheni situation. A person can become a rishon latuma. So if that means that the item that touches is an avatuma, so that person becomes a rishon, and then you can transmit from that person to food a sheni. But if the item doesn't make a person tameh, then you know you're not dealing with rishon latuma levels. And that's the circumstance here by this person touches the non-kosher chicken. Touching the non-kosher chicken doesn't make you tameh, only eating it does. Therefore, it's only really touching the food, transmitting tuma, is making that food into a sheni. It's not making it into a rishon. So that was his answer. So Rabbi Zera asked Rabbi Ami Bar Chia, V'amri la Rabbi Abin Bar Kahanan. Some said it was he was asking Rabbi Abin Bar Kahanan. Ha ditznan, that which we said in a Mishnah, Chibure Ochlin al Yedei Mashkin. If we've got two foods in a pot, and you've got a liquid mixing, you've got half of a kibetzas in this food, right? So each half of a kibetza is not itself enough food to receive tuma. But it's mixed in a pot, and there's liquid and gravy all in the pot, right? Well, you got cholent, right? So now it's all one food now because it's all mixed together. So now you've got the volume that you need to transmit tuma. Chibor letuma kala ve'ein chibor letuma chamura. So is it... if a person touches that item, right? So is it like he's touching a full kazayas of nevela? He's got like two parts of a non-kosher bird. So is it now like he's touching the whole thing as far as to transmit tuma kala, meaning to make other food and drink tameh, but it doesn't transmit tuma on a higher level? So, monin bo rishon v'sheni, o ein monin bo rishon v'sheni, meaning that I want to be able to know with this connection, does it create a rishon tuma or if somebody, one second, hold on. What's the circumstances? How you shteicha this nevela, b'chol echa mehan ein godel kazayas. So is that connection only going to transmit tuma on the lesser level, meaning make it into a sheni, or do we consider it as a rishon and a sheni? Amar Le, so he said back to him, he says that the rule generally, as we said, was if it's only going to transmit tuma, it's not going to transmit tuma to a person anyway, then we know it's a secondary level of tuma. right, as we said. Now, the reason I'm a little confused is even if it was together, it wouldn't transmit tuma. So, because we already said that bird level tuma, this nevelas oaf, so we must be talking about an item that transmits tuma on an ava tuma level. Okay, I'm a little confused by that. Okay, Yatsu Elu, let's continue on. The Mishnah then says, as far as the Tumas Begodim, if both the front people left the Azara and the back people left the Azara, then they're both Tameh. Right? That's what we said. Now we're back into our issues. We're out of Tuma now. Minani Mili, how do I know that the rule is that the Tuma goes on anybody who's carrying this? So, Detana Rabban is word. Lahalon, hu omer, later on in the Psukim, by the bull of the Kohen Mashiach and the Parhalam Davar, it says, Chutz l'shosh machnos, it has to be brought out of the three camps. By the bull of the Yom Kippur, it says lamachne achas. It only says it has to be brought out of the one camp, right? The pasuk that it's quoting is Vespara chatas vesira chatas asher huva es damam lechaper bakodesh yotzi al michutz lamachne. You got to bring it outside of the camp, and you got to burn it. So what's going on here? You have to bring it out of three camps or one camp. The answer is lomar lecha, to tell you. The place that you have to burn it is outside of the three camps. But once it goes out of the first camp, outside of the courtyard, that's where the tuma already starts. Vehi gufa minolan. Now, this rule that we learned that you're supposed to take outside of the three camps to burn it, what's the source for that? We didn't quote the pasuk. Detana Rabbanan, here's our pasuk. We learned. You have to take the bull outside of the camp. Okay, that is Vayikra Daled, that's talking about these bulls that you're going to burn, right? And it says you're supposed to burn it in a place, al eitzim ba'esh, on wood, on fire, al shefech hadeshen, on the shefech hadeshen. We're going to learn what that means. So, this is chutz l'shlosh machanos, outside of three camps. Atom l'shlosh machanos, you'd say three camps. Eino ela machanachas, maybe it's only one camp. Keshu Omer, when it says Bepar Ha'ida, it continues on and talks about the Par Ha'ida where the Beis Din makes a mistake. It says Michutz L'machan, it says again, outside of the camp. Shein Tzarech Lomar, I don't need to tell me that. Sharei Kvar Nemer, because it already said, Kashir Sarafis Par Rishon, it says you're already burning this one like you burned the last one. The last one you already said outside of one camp. Now you're saying it again. So that means outside of two camps. Litain L'machan Shniya. That's the second camp. Ukeshu Omer, then when it says Michutz L'machan, B'deshen, then it says that you're supposed to take the deshen on michutz lamachane al makom tar. You're supposed to take the deshen out to a clean place. Shein tzarech lomar. It doesn't have to tell me that it has to go outside of the camp. Sharei kvar namar shevach hadeshen yisreif. It already told me where are you burning these bulls. You're burning there wherever the deshen is. So why does it tell me to take the deshen out of the camp when, of course, it's outside of the camp. The bull is out of the camp. And you're going to burn it there. So the answer is litain lo machan shlishis. Tell me he's got to go outside of the third camp. So each time it tells me go out of another camp, it adds another camp. For Rabbi Shimon, now Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Rabbi Shimon says that's not what makes you tameh. Going out of the one camp doesn't make you tameh. He says that tameh makes you're only tameh when you actually burn it. So hami chutz l'machane ma'avidli. What does he do with the pasuk that says outside of the camp? He learns what we learned in a brayser. Rabbi Eliezer says nemar kan chutz l'machane. It says over here that you have to take the bull outside of the camp. And Nemar Laholan, it says by the Paraduma, Chutz L'machane, that it has to be brought outside of the camp. Makan, Chutz L'shalosh Machanos, just like the bulls have to be burned outside of three camps. Af Laholan, so too by Paraduma, Chutz L'shalosh Machanos. The Paraduma also has to be done and burned outside of the three camps. Ma Laholan L'mizrach Shel Yerushalayim, and the Gzer Shava works the other way too. Just like the bull, like the paraduma is done on the east side of Yerushalayim. You're supposed to stand outside the gates to be able to look through into the Beis Hamikdash. So you're on the east side. So too, Afkan lemizrach shel Yerushalayim. So too, the bulls are also being burned on the east side of Yerushalayim. El Rabbanan heicha sarflu. According to the Rabbanan, who don't use this pasuk to tell me that you have to burn it on the east side, where do they burn it? So Kedetanya, we learn in a brisa. Heicha nisrafin. Where were these animals burned? Let's phone Yerushalayim. On the north side. They held they were burned on the north side. Chutz l'shlosh machos, outside of the three camps. Why the north side? Because kachikachim are always burned on the north side. These are kachikachim. So of course it goes on the north side, but it has to be outside the three camps, so not on the east side. Rabbi Yosef Gli says, a Beis Hadeshen nisrafin. They're supposed to be burned on a place called the Beis Hadeshen, which is the place that you're supposed to burn. That's this location of the Beis Hadeshen. Now, Amar Rava, Man Tana de Poligale Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Who is it that disagrees with Rabbi Yossi Haglili? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. It's Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Tanya learned in a brisa. Al Shefach Hadesh and Yisaref. It says that the bulls are supposed to be burned on this pyre, this area of this pyre that they had outside of the three camps. Sheyehei Sham Deshen. That means that you're supposed to put the fire there first, if there's a specific location. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Rabbi Eliezer says, it doesn't mean that. It means that the place has to be slanty, right? It has to be a place that that you have to put the fire has to be on a slanted location, a hilly type place. That's all it means, not the one that was there from before. Amar le Abaye says, Dilma b'mekomo mishupach pligi. So maybe they're arguing only about whether or not the place has to be on a slant, but they all would agree with Rabbi Yossi HaGalili says that there has to be a location that was already set up and previously used as the Makom Hadeshin. Tana Rabbanan. So our rabbis bring a brisa. Vehasoref. The one who burns it, hasoref mitame begadim. The one who burns these animals, the parim and the goats, they become tamei, them and their garments. V'lo hamitzis es haor mitame begadim. Not the guy who lights the fire. The guy who lights the fire does not become tamei. Lo ha-misader samaracha, not the guy who puts the wood on the fire. He doesn't become tamei, mitam begadim. Vezu ha-soref, who is the one who actually is the burning person? Ha-mesayeh b'shas reifa, the guy who's actually standing there over the fire, poking it and keeping it going, keeping it burning. That's the guy who becomes tamei. Yachol af mishin asu efer. You might think, okay, now it's already turns into ashes. So now the guy who comes over and he's poking it to break it up, it's in ashes. Does he become tamei? Mitam begadim, tam begadim. The pasuk says, osam, the one who burned it, meaning osam mitam begadim. It has to be still part of the animal in order for you to. Once it's ashes already, then that's not, when you start poking the fire at that point, you're not mitame begadim, you don't become tamei anymore. Mishanasin le'efer ein mitame begadim. Once it becomes ashes, it doesn't transmit tuma to the garments. Rabbi Shimon says, osam mitame begadim nita chabasar ein mitame begadim. It says that Rabbi Shimon says that from the word hasoref, when those animal parts, when the parts of the animal are still present, so then they transmit tuma. He says once the animal gets singed, then it's no longer going to transmit tuma. My beinahu, what's the difference between those 2 points of view? Amarava ika beinahu deshavye charucha. The question is, once it's singed, but it has not been, doesn't actually turn to ash, doesn't crumble, is that still the animal and you're still mitame begadim if you poke that at that point? And he says, one opinion says yes, the other says no. Once it's singed, it's considered to be not the animal anymore, and you're not going to be tamei anymore. That concludes that parak.